This is the recording of topic 14-3, factoring polynomials, day 2. We're going to start with the bell work that is at the top of that topic. Our bell work says which line appears to have a slope of 0 and which line appears to have an undefined slope. Just looking at the graph, I'm going to recall our Vux-Hoy, in which the Vux, the V, stands for I'm looking for a vertical line. U tells me the slope is undefined. And the x tells me my equation is going to be x equal. The Hoy tells me I have a horizontal line. The slope is going to be 0, taken from the O in the middle, and my equation is going to be y equal. So if I'm looking for a 0 slope line, I know I need a horizontal line. The horizontal line that's given here is line W. For my second one, I need undefined slope. An undefined slope is a vertical line. My vertical line is line P. As we work on today's topic, you will need a calculator because our objective is for you to factor trinomials again. Remember that factoring is the opposite of multiplication. So our first example is going to show how factoring is the opposite of multiplication. We did this yesterday. This is just a refresher. First thing we want to do is I have two binomials that are being multiplied together, so I'm going to multiply those two binomials together. I like to use the box method. And so with my box, I'm going to create 2 rows and 2 columns because I have 2 terms in my first parenthesis and 2 terms in my second parenthesis. So the first parenthesis, I'm going to put it along a top above the columns. I put a 3x with the first column, a plus 6 with the second column. For my second parenthesis, it's going to go along the rows. So I put an x for my first row and a negative 12 for my second row. And now I will multiply. 3x times x gives us 3x squared. 6 times x is 6x. 3x times a negative 12, that'll give us a negative 36x. And then 6 times a negative 12 will be a negative 72. Now I'm going to take what's in my box and write it out. We get 3x squared. That's a positive 6x. I'll put plus 6x, minus 36x, and minus 72. Now I know I can combine the like terms. It's the terms that are in the middle, which are also my terms that are along my diagonal. So the 3x squared stays the same in front. We have 6x minus 36x. That'll give us a negative 30x and then a minus 72. Now that we have a trinomial, we're going to show how to factor it. And again, it's just the opposite of multiplication. So the first thing we do is determine, do we have a GCF? We look at each individual term and see, is there a common factor with each term? So I'm going to write them up and down to show them. I already noticed that they do not have x's. Not everyone has x's, so x will not be my GCF. So now we'll look at my numbers, and I recognize that 3 can go in every single one of those numbers. So we're going to factor out of 3. It's my GCF. I'll go ahead and put that in my first step, that the GCF is 3. And now to get what's remaining inside the parentheses, we're going to divide the original trinomial by 3. Every single item. So 3x squared divided by 3 leaves us with x squared. Negative 30x divided by 3, well, the negative 30 divided by 3 is negative 10. We still have an x. And then negative 72 divided by 3 is going to give us a negative 24. So now that we have our trinomial with the GCF factored out, we can now do the second step, which is what is the sum, what is the product. The sum comes from the number in front of the x. So here's my sum. In this case, my sum is negative 10. The product comes from multiplying the coefficient of the x squared and your constant. This coefficient is a 1, since it's not shown. So we're doing 1 times the very last number of negative 24. Our product is a negative 24. We need two numbers that are going to multiply to give you negative 24, but will add to give you a negative 10. So we need to figure out what those factors are. Again, what multiplies to give you negative 24, but add to give you negative 10. And some of you might be able to figure out those two numbers without a problem, but if you can't, we're going to use our calculator. Using your calculator, you go to Y1, and in Y1, we're going to put in our product, which is negative 24, divided by x. So I type in negative 24 divided by x. And when I do this, if I was to go to my table at this time, this would give me all the factors, what two numbers I can multiply together to get me negative 24. So it's giving me all the factors of my product. However, I also need to know what two numbers will add up to be a negative 10. So in Y2, I'm going to put the exact same thing I put in Y1, negative 24 divided by x, but now I'm going to do plus x because I need it to add up. So let's type in negative 24 divided by x plus x. Now when I look at my table, I have 3 columns. And in my 3 columns, I'm going to use it in order to find my factors that will multiply to give me negative 24, but they need to add up to be negative 10. So I'm looking for my sum in the second column of Y2. I will use my arrow key to arrow up and down until I find negative 10 in the Y2 column. I see negative 10 in the Y2 column. The two numbers that are in X and Y1, those are my factors. Those are the ones that will multiply to give me negative 24. And I can see 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. But they are also the two numbers that when I add them together will get me negative 10. So my factors are negative 12 and a positive 2. Last, in order to write it in factored form, the GCF goes first, and then my factors go inside the parentheses. So minus 12 and then plus 2. And we have now factored. So again, it's the opposite of multiplication. If I multiply all this out, I should end up with the trinomial. Let's do some more problems. Our first example we have is 2x squared minus 6x minus 36. I will look to see, is there a GCF? Is there a number that goes in the 2, negative 6, and negative 36? And I recognize, yes, it is. There's a 2. So I'll put a 2 and in parentheses so I can rewrite my trinomial. And I'm going to divide everything by 2. Dividing everything by 2 leaves me with x squared minus 3x minus 18. 36 divided by 2 is 18. Now, based upon my new trinomial, I see my sum is the negative 3, and my product, first times the last, that's a negative 18. Using my calculator, y1, I'm going to put the product, negative 18 divided by x. y2, we do negative 18 divided by x plus x. I'm showing a lot of extra steps here, but in y2, I want to find my sum of negative 3. So let's go back to y equals. Now I'm going to type in negative 18, replacing that negative 24. Go to second table, and now I'm looking for negative 3 in my y2. Negative 3 in y2, again, in order to scroll down, I have to stay in the x column. I find negative 3 in my y2, so my two factors are negative 6 and a positive 3. My answer, I write my GCF, and then I write my factors inside. So 2 times x minus 6 times x plus 3. Look at our next one. Notice there is no number in front of the x squared, so sorry about that. The GCF is none. The sum is going to come from the number in front of the x. So I'll put, there's my sum, it's a negative 11. The product, multiply the first and the last, that gives us 28. We are going to find the factors by y1. We'll put in 28 divided by x, y2, 28 divided by x plus x. And in our y2 column, we are looking for negative 11. So y1, I now want to replace that with a 28. y2, I will replace my negative 18 with a 28. Go to second graph, so I bring up my table. This time we're looking for negative 11, and I find negative 11 in y2, and see that my factors are negative 7 and negative 4. Since there is no GCF, I don't need to put anything in the front, and I put my factors into the parenthesis. Example 3. Notice now we have a binomial. There are only two terms in this one. With our two terms, again, I'm going to check to see is there GCF, and I'll check to see is there anything in front of the x squared. If there's nothing in front of the x squared, there is no GCF. Notice because of this binomial, there's a term missing. It's the number in front of the x, which is where we always got our sum from. So because there's no number in front of the x, there's no number there, our sum is going to be equal to 0. Our product is still the first number or the first term times the last, which is going to be a negative 25. So I'm looking for two numbers that will add up to 0, but will multiply to be negative 25. So I'm looking for two numbers to start with the product. I want to find what two numbers will multiply to do negative 25. So I have negative 25, that's a negative, divided by x and y1, and y2, we do negative 25 divided by x plus x. Calculator again. This time I need a negative. So it's negative 25. I got negative 28. I mean negative 25. And then the bottom, again, negative 25 divided by x plus x. Go to my second table. I'm looking for a sum that equals to 0, and I can spot it right off the bat. And that is when my factors are 5 and negative 5. So inside, I'll put a plus 5, minus 5. Nothing goes in the GCF. Example 4. We have x squared plus 3x minus 10. There's no GCF. The sum is going to be our 3. We're back to trinomials. Our product, negative 10. So here's our sum. Product, multiply the first and the last. I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 10, but will add to give me a positive 3. Using the calculator again, because they didn't come to me immediately, I'll do negative 10 divided by x, and then negative 10 divided by x plus x. Hit the second table. And now I am looking for a positive 3 in my y2, because that's my sum. Scrolling down, I find positive 3 in my y2, so my factors are negative 2 and positive 5. My answer, there's no GCF, so I have a negative 2 and a positive 5. That concludes the notes for today. If you have any other questions, you need to talk to your teacher about this or review a couple of the other lessons in the previous section.